In the hushed, lace-lit salons of a Bruges canal mansion, a wedding breakfast turns lethal when a single sip of chocolate fells the bride. The Verstraeten lace fortune, 5 swans in perfect thread, conceals a debt that demands blood. Hercule Poirot, with his immaculate mustache and little gray cells, traces a trail of midnight gondolas, violet-inked warnings, and cyanide hidden in a doctor's bag. As the ancient house guards its secrets behind bottle-glass windows, a killer, family, lover, or servant, prepares a second strike. Will Poirot untie the fatal knot before the bells ring for a funeral instead of a marriage? The truth floats where swans dare not swim. Chapter 1. The lace-maker's invitation, Hercule Poirot, descended from the Brussels train at Bruges with the measured dignity of a man who regards punctuality as a cardinal virtue. The platform smelled faintly of coal smoke and river damp. Beyond the iron roof, the October sky hung low and pearl gray, promising neither sun nor storm. A porter in a blue cap touched his peak and took the small valises of green leather. Poirot traveled light, for the mind, he said, required no trunk. He had come at the bidding of a letter. It lay now in the inner pocket of his overcoat, pressed against the heart which, though orderly, was not insensitive to flattery. The envelope was of heavy cream paper, the flap sealed with wax the color of old ivory. Impressed in the wax was a tiny bobbin crossed by a needle. The handwriting within was firm, upright, the script of a woman who had ruled a household for half a century. My dear Monsieur Poirot, forgive the presumption of one who has never met you save in the pages of Le Soir. A tangle threatens the peace of our ancient city, and the threads are of such delicacy that only your fingers, so famously nimble, may unravel them without snapping the strand. Come, I beg, before the knot tightens into a noose. Your obedient servant, Madame Clotilde Verstraeten, née van der Weyden de Vijf Zwanen, diver 17. Poirot had smiled at the metaphor. Lace-makers, he reflected, saw life as pattern and peril. He had telegraphed his acceptance from the Hôtel Britannique, adding only that he preferred the afternoon train. A fiacre awaited him. Bruges disdained the motor taxi, and the horse, a placid chestnut, set off at a trot that shook the little bells on its harness. They passed beneath the arched gateway of the Porte Sainte-Croix, where the stones still bore the scars of 1914, and entered the city proper. The canals lay on either hand like dark mirrors. Willows trailed their fingers in the water, and the gabled houses, pink and ochre and faded gold, leaned forward as if to listen. Swans moved with arrogant grace, 5 of them together, and Poirot noted the coincidence with a lift of the eyebrow. The house of Madame Verstraeten stood at the bend, where the Diva widens into a small basin. It was tall, narrow, immaculately Flemish, step gable, white stone dressings, windows of bottle glass that distorted the world into gentle ripples. A brass knocker in the shape of a swan gleamed upon the black door. Before Poirot could lift his cane, the door opened. She was smaller than he had imagined, but straight as a candle. 70 years had drawn fine lines about her mouth and eyes, yet the eyes themselves, pale blue, northern, were undimmed. Her dress was black silk, high at the throat, relieved only by a collar of lace so intricate that it seemed spun by spiders in a dream. Monsieur Poirot. Her voice was low, precise, the French of the cultivated Flemish. You are exact to the minute. I am gratified. Madame, the pleasure is mine. He bowed over her hand. The skin was cool, the bones delicate yet firm. She led him through a vestibule paneled in dark oak, where ancestors in ruffs gazed down with the severity of judges. A faint scent of potpourri and beeswax hung in the air. They ascended a staircase, whose treads creaked in polite protest, and entered a salon that looked upon the canal. The room was furnished with the austere elegance of the 17th century. Tall chairs of walnut, a tapestry of the Judgment of Paris, a marquetry cabinet displaying Sèvres porcelain. Sunlight, filtered through the old glass, lay in wavering bars across a carpet from Smyrna. Madame Verstraeten indicated a chair opposite her own. A manservant, elderly, taciturn, wearing the black apron of indoor service, brought coffee in cups of eggshell porcelain, and departed without a sound. Poirot sipped. The coffee was excellent, strong, aromatic. He set the cup down and regarded his hostess with the bright, bird-like glance that had discomposed so many. "You spoke, madame, of a tangle. Permit me to observe that tangles in families are rarely accidental. Someone winds the thread." She inclined her head. "You are as direct as your reputation. Good. I have no taste for circumlocution." From a petit point reticule, she drew a square of parchment and laid it upon the table between them. The message was composed of letters cut from newspapers and pasted with flour and water glue. The ink was violet, the hand uneven. "The bride will not reach the altar." Poirot turned the card with the tongs of his mind. "No signature. The paste is fresh. Observe the sheen. Your enemy is close, madame, and in haste." "My nephew Carol weds in 9 days. The young woman is English, a Miss Eleanor Gray. The banns are published. The veil is at the Béguinage for its final stitches. The banquet is ordered from the Hôtel du Panier d'Or. Yet this—" She touched the parchment with a gloved finger. "Arrived by the morning post. No wrapper, no stamp. Delivered by hand." Poirot's mustaches assumed their most symmetrical curve. "You have suspicions." "Suspicion is a luxury I deny myself until proof is offered, but there are undercurrents. My sister-in-law, Clotilde de Jaeger, believes the alliance beneath the family. Dr. Vries, our physician, has been attentive to the bride. Mr. Reginald Blunt, the girl's cousin, drinks brandy at noon and speaks of railway shares. And there is the lace itself." "The lace?" "The veil is Point de Gaze, 300 hours in the making. It bears the Verstraeten cipher, 5 swans entwined. Yesterday a corner was found snipped away, as though someone wished a fragment for mischief." Poirot leaned forward. "You will present me to the household this evening, madame? I prefer to observe the pattern before I cut the thread." "Naturally. You will dine with us at 8. The blue chamber is prepared. It overlooks the canal. From its window one may see the swans, and whatever else moves upon the water after dark." She rose, a signal that the audience was ended. At the door she paused. "One thing more, monsieur. Bruges is a city of silences. Speak softly, but listen well." Poirot bowed. "I am, madame, the most discreet of listeners." Left alone, he moved to the window. The 5 swans drifted beneath the bridge, their reflections trembling. Somewhere in the maze of canals, a church bell struck the quarter. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The game, as his friend Hastings would have said, was afoot, but Poirot preferred to think of it as a piece of lace, intricate, fragile, and capable of cutting the hand that mishandled it. Chapter 2. The House of the 5. Swans. The Blue Chamber was precisely what Poirot expected from a house that had sheltered Verstraetens since the days of the Spanish governors. The bedstead was of carved oak, high and somber, with a canopy from which hung curtains of faded damask the color of burgundy wine. A crucifix of ivory and ebony dominated the wall opposite the window. Beneath it, a prie-dieu suggested that the last occupant had taken piety seriously. The air carried the faint perfume of lavender and old wood smoke. Poirot unpacked with ritual care. The green valise yielded 2 suits of impeccable cut, 3 pairs of gloves, a dozen handkerchiefs starched to knife edges, and the small leather case containing his toilet articles. Each bottle, each brush, arranged in the order he had established in 1904, and never varied. He placed his silver-backed brushes upon the dressing table, aligned the ebony comb with mathematical exactitude, and surveyed the result with satisfaction. Order, he reminded himself, is the foundation of detection. From the window he looked down upon the Diver Canal. The water lay dark and glossy, reflecting the gables opposite like a second city inverted. The 5 swans, real, not heraldic, moved in stately procession beneath the bridge, their necks curved in identical interrogation marks. A gondola, absurdly Venetian in this Flemish setting, glided past. The rower wore a black half-mask and a cloak of midnight blue. Poirot's eyebrows ascended a fraction. Bruges, he reflected, was not Venice, yet someone evidently wished to suggest otherwise. At 7 o'clock, a gong of mellow bronze sounded through the house. Poirot descended the staircase, cane in hand, the ferrule tapping a measured rhythm on the worn oak. The hall was lit by a single chandelier of Murano glass. Its pendants shivered in the draught from the canal, scattering prisms across the paneling. The salon doors stood open. Madame Verstraeten received him with the composure of a duchess. She wore the same black silk, but the lace at her throat had been replaced by a collar of diamonds so fine they might have been dew on cobweb. "Allow me to present my household," she said. They entered the long dining room, where a table of 17th-century refectory oak was laid for 8. Candles in silver sconces threw pools of light upon the damask cloth. Between them stood bowls of late roses, whose petals were already browning at the edges. Karl Verstraeten rose first. He was 30, tall, with the fair hair and opaque blue eyes of his race. His dinner jacket was English, his manner a shade too easy, as though he had learned confidence from textbooks. "Monsieur Poirot, your fame precedes you. My aunt flatters us by importing the best." His French was fluent, but the accent betrayed Ghent rather than Brussels. Poirot inclined his head. "One tries, monsieur, to deserve the flattery." Eleanor Gray sat at Karl's right. She was slight, with a kind of pallor that suggests watercolors rather than flesh and blood. Her gown was of ivory silk, high-waisted, with a single string of pearls. Her eyes, violet, enormous, rested on Poirot with the wariness of a fawn. "I have read of you, monsieur," she said in English so pure it might have been cut by a diamond. "In Norfolk we consider you quite mythical." "Myth, mademoiselle, is merely truth exaggerated by distance." Dr. Hans Vries was already seated. He was thin to the point of emaciation, with a scholar's stoop and hands that moved with the precision of surgical instruments. His beard was trimmed to a point. His eyes, behind pince-nez, were the cold gray of canal water in winter. He inclined his head, but did not speak. Mevrouw Clotilde de Jager occupied the foot of the table like a dowager battleship. She was Madame Verstraeten's sister-in-law, widowed these 20 years. Her gown was black velvet, her bosom a fortress of jet beads. The face above it was handsome in the heavy Flemish way, but the mouth had settled into a permanent disapproval. "Detective?" she said, tasting the word as though it were a dubious oyster. "We are honored, I am sure." Poirot bowed. "Madame, the honor is to serve." Reginald Blunt, the English cousin, required no introduction. He supplied it himself in a voice that carried to the rafters. He was large, florid, dressed in a check suit that would have been loud in Piccadilly. His tie-pin was a diamond the size of a pea. "Blunt's the name, railway's the game. Belgian state, you know, expanding like anything. Miss, Gray's my ward, more or less. Family duty, what?" He laughed. A sound like gravel poured down a chute. The final guest was Sœur Angèle, a lay sister from the Béguinage engaged to complete the bridal lace. She wore the gray habit of her order, the white coif framing a face of extraordinary serenity. Her hands, folded upon the table, were those of an artist. Long, pale, the fingers stained faintly with pin-pricks. Dinner was announced. The manservant, Jeff, Poirot learned, served with the silence of a shadow. The meal began with consommé madrilène, clear as topaz. It was followed by soles à la Diepoise, then a baron of lamb with truffles, the flesh pink and fragrant. The wines were a Meursault of delicate bouquet and a Chateau Margaux that caused even Poirot to pause in appreciation. Conversation flowed in two streams, French at one end, English at the other, meeting occasionally in the neutral territory of the doctor's precise bilingualism. Carroll spoke of the laceworks. "We are modernizing, monsieur. Electricity, new looms from Nottingham. Tradition must breathe or it suffocates." His Aunt Clotilde snorted. "Tradition is the skeleton. Remove it and the body collapses." Eleanor said softly, "The veil is tradition enough for me. 300 hours of Point de Gaze. Sœur Angèle's fingers must ache." The nun smiled. "Pain is the price of beauty, my child." Blunt helped himself to a third glass of Margaux. "Shares, that's the ticket. Verstraeten lace. Public company, eh, Carroll? Floated on the bourse. Pay the debts, marry where you like." Carroll's smile was thin. "Some things, Reginald, are not for sale." Dr. Vries interposed smoothly. "Health is the first consideration. Miss Gray has been delicate. The excitement, perhaps." Eleanor flushed. "I am quite well, thank you." Madame Verstraeten tapped her plate with a spoon. "We speak of indiscretions. Let us speak instead of the wedding. The Archbishop himself will officiate at Saint-Sauveur. The veil will be carried by 6 pages in Van Dyck costume." Poirot listened, observed. The candles burned lower, shadows lengthened along the paneling. Jeff removed the lamb and brought a crème brûlée, whose surface crackled satisfyingly beneath the spoon. Coffee was served in the petit salon, a room paneled in cedar and hung with miniatures of Verstraeten brides. The air was heavy with the scent of roses and the faint, acrid tang of cigar smoke. Blunt's indiscretion. Poirot accepted a liqueur glass of Armagnac and stationed himself near the window. The canal lay black beneath a crescent moon. The swans had vanished. Carroll approached, glass in hand. "You will forgive the melodrama, monsieur. My aunt takes omens seriously." "Omens, monsieur, are the small change of fear." "Tell me, have you received other warnings?" "None. Only this." Carroll drew from his pocket a lace medallion no larger than a florin. It showed a swan with a broken neck. Found on my desk this morning." Poirot turned the fragment beneath the lamp. The stitches were exquisite, the break deliberate. "Point de gaze," he murmured. "The hand of Sir Angel, perhaps?" Carol shrugged. "She works in the lace room all day. Anyone might have taken a scrap." Across the room, Eleanor laughed at something Blunt was saying, but the laughter did not reach her eyes. Clotilde de Jaeger sat rigid, her jet beads rising and falling with controlled indignation. Dr. Vries cleaned his pince-nez with a silk handkerchief, the gesture precise, repetitive. Madame Verstraeten touched Poirot's sleeve. "You will walk with me on the terrace. The air is mild." They stepped through the French windows onto a stone balcony that overhung the canal. The night was still, only the faint lap of water against the quay and the distant cry of a gull disturbed the silence. "You see the problem," Madame said. "Family, money, pride, a dangerous trinity." Poirot's cane tapped the balustrade. "And love, Madame. Never underestimate love." She was silent a moment. Then, "Carol believes himself in love. Eleanor is charming, but charm is not dowry. The English cousin smells of brandy and speculation. My sister-in-law would sell her soul to keep the laceworks pure. The doctor?" She shrugged. "Doctors are men beneath the starch." A ripple disturbed the canal. The black gondola again, moving without sound. This time the rower shipped his oar and drifted beneath the terrace. The mask gleamed like a shard of night. Poirot leaned forward. "You permit masquerades, Madame?" "We do not. That is new." The gondolier raised one hand in a slow salute, then pulled away into the darkness. Madame Verstraeten's fingers tightened on the balustrade. "You see? The knot tightens." Poirot watched the wake widen and vanish. "Patience, Madame. Threads reveal themselves to those who wait." Behind them the French windows closed. The household retired, footsteps echoing along corridors. Poirot lingered a moment longer, breathing the scent of water and willow. Somewhere in the house a clock struck 11, the notes falling clear and cold into the night. He turned indoors. The game of lace had begun, and Hercule Poirot intended to play it to the last meticulous stitch. Chapter 3. The Poisoned Chocolate. The household of De Vijf. Zwanen rose early, as was the Flemish habit, but on this particular morning the routine shattered like dropped Sèvres. At 7:30, Jeff, the manservant, tapped on Poirot's door with the discreet double knock of long service. Poirot, already shaved and immaculate in dove gray, opened at once. "Monsieur, it is Mademoiselle Eleanor. She is unwell." The man's face was the color of wet parchment. Poirot wasted no words. He seized his cane and followed Jeff along the corridor to the Rose Suite, a chamber at the rear of the house overlooking a small formal garden where clipped yews stood like black chessmen. The door stood ajar. Inside, chaos reigned. Eleanor Gray lay half across the bed, one arm trailing to the floor, the fingers still curled about the handle of a Sèvres cup. The cup had overturned. A dark stain spread across the counterpane and dripped with slow persistence onto the parquet. The air was sharp with the scent of bitter almonds. Karel Verstraeten knelt beside her, his face blanched to the roots of his fair hair. Dr. Vries bent over the girl, stethoscope pressed to the lace of her nightgown. Madame Verstraeten stood at the foot of the bed, upright, but her hands were clasped so tightly that the knuckles showed white. Clotilde de Jaeger hovered in the doorway, a black crow in velvet, while Reginald Blunt collarless and unshaven, peered over her shoulder with the goggling stare of a man who has been dragged from sleep by nightmare. Sœur Angèle alone remained apart, near the window, her rosary clicking softly between her fingers. Poirot took in the scene with one sweep of the eye. "Do not touch the cup," he said sharply. "Doctor, your diagnosis?" Vries straightened. "Prussic acid, hydrocyanic, administered in the chocolate. The quantity is massive. She should be dead." Yet Eleanor was not dead. A faint pulse fluttered at her throat. Her lips, blue as damsons, parted in a shallow breath. "Impossible," Vries muttered. "The dose is perhaps not what it seems," Poirot finished. He knelt, sniffed the stain. "Bitter almonds, yes, but observe the color, darker than pure acid. Someone has been economical." Carol's voice cracked. "She drank it at 6. I brought the tray myself from the kitchen. 2 cups, 1 for each of us. I left mine on the desk in the study. She must have come down later, thirsty." Madame Verstraeten's tone cut like a bobbin. "You left poison unattended?" "I left chocolate, Aunt, ordinary chocolate." Poirot lifted the cup with his handkerchief. A thin rim of sediment clung to the porcelain. He touched it with a gloved finger, tasted, grimaced. "Cocoa, sugar, and something else. Doctor, your bag, if you please." Vries produced a small morocco case. From it, Poirot took a strip of test paper, moistened it with the dregs, held it to the light. The paper turned brick red. "Cyanide," Vries confirmed, "but diluted, perhaps 1 part in 10. "Enough to fell a horse," Blunt said hoarsely. "Yet she breathes." "She is young," Vries replied. "The heart is strong, and the dose, as Monsieur Poirot observes, was tampered with." Poirot's gaze traveled the room. The bed was unrumpled save where Eleanor lay. The counterpane bore the imprint of her body as though she had fallen across it in mid-stride. On the night table stood a carafe of water, untouched. A lace nightcap lay discarded on the floor. Its ribbons were tied in a perfect bow. He moved to the window. It was closed, the catch firm. Outside the garden lay, innocent in the pale morning light. Dew glistened on the yew hedges, and a single swan, escaped from the canal, waddled across the gravel with proprietary arrogance. Sœur Angèle ceased her rosary. "She came to the lace room at midnight, monsieur, said she could not sleep. I gave her a tisane of lime flower. She was agitated, spoke of dreams." "Dreams of what?" "Of swans drowning." The nun's voice was barely audible. Poirot turned to Carol. "The tray, monsieur. Describe it." "Silver, George III, from my mother's dowry. 2 cups, saucers, a small pot of chocolate, a jug of cream. I carried it myself from the kitchen at 10 minutes before 6. The cook had just prepared it." "And you drank?" "I tasted mine. Hot, sweet. I set it on the desk beside my letters. Then I went to dress." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You left the study door unlocked?" "The house is not a bank, monsieur." Madame Verstraeten said, "Jeff locks the outer doors at 10. After that, we are a family." Poirot addressed the doctor. "She will live?" "With care, yes. I have administered an antidote, sodium thiosulfate. She must be watched. No more chocolate." Eleanor stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, the violet eyes opened, unfocused. "Carol, I am here, Leafia." He took her hand. It burned, like fire, then cold. Her voice was a thread. "I thought, the swans." She relapsed into uneasy slumber. Poirot drew Vries aside. "The chocolate in the pot. Test it." The doctor decanted a sample into a phial. The liquid was thick, innocent brown. He added a drop of reagent. no change. The poison was in the cup alone, Vries said, added after the pot was filled. Poirot nodded. Someone entered the study between 6 and whenever Mademoiselle drank. Who has access? The entire household, Madame Verstraeten replied. The study is Carol's sanctum, but the door stands open until noon. Poirot stooped and examined the carpet. A faint trail of droplets led from the door to the desk. Chocolate, not poison. He followed it with his eyes. The desk was a massive piece of bulwark. Upon it lay the untouched cup, still half full, a skin forming on the surface. Beside it, a blotter, a silver paper knife, and the lace medallion of the broken swan. He lifted the medallion. The break was fresh. Tiny threads of silk clung to the edge. Curious, he murmured. The swan returns. Clotilde de Jaeger spoke for the first time. The girl is hysterical. She imagines persecution. In my day. In your day, madame, Poirot interrupted gently. Poison was less scientific. Blunt cleared his throat. Look here, this is devilish serious. If someone's trying to kill the chap, or the lady, Poirot corrected. The cup was intended for Monsieur Carrel, but Mademoiselle drank. A mistake, or a warning. He turned to Sœur Angèle. You work in the lace room, ma sœur. This medallion, is it your work? She hesitated. The pattern is mine, yes, but anyone may copy a motif. The lace room is never locked. Poirot addressed the company. For the present, no one leaves the house without my knowledge. Doctor, you will remain with the patient. Jeff, the kitchen is to be sealed. The pot, the jug, every utensil preserved. Madame, your permission to examine the study? Granted. They filed out, leaving Vries with his patient. In the corridor, Clotilde de Jaeger paused. You will find, monsieur, that English girls are fragile. Perhaps the marriage should be postponed. Poirot's smile was wintry. Fragile, madame? She has survived cyanide. I think the marriage will proceed, unless the murderer succeeds next time. In the study, he worked alone. The room smelled of cedar and old paper. Bookshelves rose to the ceiling. A portrait of a Verstraeten burgomaster in fur robes glowered down. The desk drawers yielded nothing but ledgers and correspondence. Bills from Nottingham loom makers, a letter from a London banker marked urgent. On the blotter, beneath the cup, a faint impression. The outline of a swan, drawn in ink and then scratched out. The paper knife lay at an angle, as though dropped in haste. Poirot opened the French window. It gave onto the terrace where he had stood with Madame Verstraeten the previous night. The canal lay 30 feet below. A stone balustrade prevented accident. Footprints in the dew, small, pointed, led from the window to the water's edge and vanished. He leaned out. Directly beneath, a narrow landing stage jutted into the canal. A mooring ring was wet, as though a boat had lately been tied there. Poirot straightened. The gondolier, he said softly. He brings more than warnings. From the garden came the sudden honk of the stray swan. Poirot looked down. The bird had found something glittering among the gravel. It pecked, then flapped away in disgust. Poirot descended the outer stair. The object was a tiny glass phial, empty, its cork missing. He wrapped it in his handkerchief and slipped it into his pocket. Above him, in the rose suite, a bell tinkled. Eleanor waking. Poirot returned indoors, his face grave. The chocolate had been poisoned, the dose diluted, the warning delivered. But the game, he reflected, was far from played out. In Bruges, as in life, the pattern was never complete until the last thread was placed and cut. Chapter 4. The ledger in the belfry. The belfry of Bruges, that stern, grey sentinel, had stood since the 13th century, its carillon marking the hours for merchants, lovers, and, on occasion, murderers. At 10:30, Poirot mounted the 366 steps with the steady gait of a man who regards physical exertion as a necessary evil. The stair spiraled upward like the interior of a nautilus shell. The stone treads were hollowed by centuries of feet. He paused at the first landing to admire the view through a slit window. The city lay spread beneath him in a checkerboard of red roofs and silver canals. The swans on the diver were white commas upon black ink. A breeze carried the scent of warm bread from the bakeries in the Vollestraat. Higher still, the mechanism room. The great bronze bells hung motionless, their clappers tied with crimson cord against the wind. In the center stood the drum, a vast cylinder studded with pegs that tripped the hammers at the appointed hours. Dust motes danced in shafts of light from the Louvre. Poirot's interest, however, was not musical. In a niche behind the drum lay a red leather ledger, its corners curled like petals. He had observed Karl Verstraeten climbing these stairs at dawn, a bulky parcel beneath his arm. The boy had returned empty-handed. Poirot opened the ledger. The entries were in Carroll's neat commercial hand. 15 March, RB 500 against 5% laceworks, 2 May, RB 750, promissory note, 14 September, RB $1,000, final payment on wedding day. If marriage fails, debt void. The last line was underlined twice. Beneath it, in a different ink, violet, the color of the warning note, someone had scrawled, "Swans drown at midnight." Poirot closed the book. So, Monsieur Blunt is a creditor, and the wedding is his security. He slipped the ledger beneath his coat and descended. The carillon struck 11 as he emerged into the markt. The notes rolled across the square like golden balls. Back at De Vijftswanen, the house was quiet. Eleanor slept under the influence of a sedative. Dr. Vries had pronounced her out of danger, but weak. Madame Verstraeten had retired to her boudoir with a headache. Genuine, Poirot suspected, for the first time in years. He found Sir Angèle in the lace room, a long apartment on the second floor where north light fell through tall windows onto a dozen lace pillows. The air was cool, scented with starch and the faint metallic tang of pins. The nun sat at the central pillow, her bobbins moving with the precision of a watchmaker. The bridal veil lay half-finished, a cloud of gossamer threaded with seed pearls. "You climb towers, monsieur?" she asked without looking up. "The view is instructive, ma sœur. One sees the pattern." She pinned a thread, twisted, pinned again. Patterns are dangerous. They reveal what the heart conceals. Poirot drew the red ledger from his coat. This pattern, for example, Monsieur Carrel borrows heavily from Monsieur Blunt. The marriage cancels the debt. Someone wishes the marriage cancelled. Sir Angèle's fingers stilled. Money is a coarse thread in fine lace. Yet it binds. Tell me, last night, after midnight, did anyone pass this room? The house sleeps lightly. I heard footsteps, soft, like a woman's. Then the creak of the study door. You did not investigate. My duty is to the veil, not to shadows. Poirot moved to the window. From here he could see the belfry, the canal, and the landing stage, where he had found the file. A gondola lay moored there now, black as a hearse, its prow carved into a swan's neck. "The gondolier," he said. "You know him?" She crossed herself. He brings threads from Venice, silk, gold. The family has dealt with him for years. He asks no questions. His name? They call him Il Corvo, the Raven. Poirot turned. You substituted the poison, monsieur. The dose was lethal. You diluted it with water from the carafe. Why? Her eyes met his, calm as canal water. Because murder is a sin, and warning is a mercy. Someone wished Carroll dead. I wished him frightened. You risk much. God weighs the intention, not the act. Poirot replaced the ledger in his pocket. You will continue your work, but the veil must be finished by tomorrow. I have need of it. She bowed her head over the bobbins. As you wish, monsieur. In the corridor, Poirot encountered Clotilde de Jaeger. She carried a small portmanteau and wore a traveling cloak. You leave us, madame? My nerves, monsieur. The country air at our villa near Dam will restore you. Alas, no one leaves this house until the pattern is complete. Her eyes flashed. You presume? I insist. The police have been notified. A sergeant waits below. She swept past him, the portmanteau bumping the wall. Poirot descended to the study. Carroll was there, pacing before the fireplace. You found the ledger, the young man said flatly. I did. You are in debt to Monsieur Blunt for £2,500. A fortune. Carroll sank into a chair. The new looms, English machinery. The banks demanded security. Blunt offered terms. If I marry Eleanor, her dowry, small but real, pays him. If not, the laceworks are his. Your Aunt Clotilde knows this? She drafted the agreement. She believes Eleanor common. And you? I love her. The words were simple, almost defiant. Poirot nodded. Love is a thread that cannot be bought, but murder, monsieur, is another matter. He opened the desk drawer. Inside lay a second phial, identical to the one in the garden, half full of clear liquid. Cyanide, Carrel whispered. From the doctor's bag? Or from Venice via Il Corvo? A bell rang. Luncheon. Poirot replaced the phial. Come, we play our parts a little longer. The meal was somber. Eleanor, pale but composed, sat at Carl's right, a shawl about her shoulders. Blunt drank steadily, his tie askew. Clotilde was absent. Sulking, Jeff reported. Dr. Vries carved the capon with surgical precision. A conversation limped. The carillon struck one. The notes floated through the open windows like a funeral march. After coffee, Poirot requested the household to assemble in the salon at 4. A small experiment, he said. Nothing to alarm. They gathered reluctantly. The afternoon light slanted through the bottle glass, painting the rug in wavering squares. Poirot stood before the fireplace, the red ledger in his hand. We have a poisoner among us, he began. The chocolate was intended for Monsieur Carrel. Mademoiselle drank by mistake. The dose was diluted, by design or accident. The warning notes, the broken swan, the gondolier, all point to a pattern. But patterns, mesdames et messieurs, have loose threads. He opened the ledger. Monsieur Blunt, you lent money against the marriage. Madame Clotilde, you drafted the terms. Dr. Vries, your bag supplied the poison, or appeared to. Sir Angel, you diluted the dose. Il Corvo delivered the phial. Each of you has a thread, but only one weaves the noose. Blunt lurched to his feet. See here, you little... Sit down, monsieur. The police wait outside. A silence fell, broken only by the tick of the ormolu clock. Poirot continued. The murderer is clever, but not clever enough. The diluted poison was a mistake. It proved a hand that mixed it new chemistry. Doctor? Vries smiled thinly. I am flattered. Not you. You would have used the full dose. No, The hand is delicate, accustomed to precision, a lace-maker's hand. Sir Angèle raised her head. You accuse me? I accuse no one, yet, but the veil, ma sœur, will speak. He produced the bridal veil, finished now, shimmering like moonlight. In the center, where 5 swans should entwine, one swan lay with its neck twisted into a perfect noose. The pattern was altered last night, Poirot said, by the same hand that wrote in violet ink, that left the medallion, that paid Il Corvo, the hand that wishes the marriage stopped at any cost. Clotilde de Jaeger rose, trembling. This is madness. Madness, madame? Or greed? The laceworks would pass to you if Carol died unmarried. You forged the notes, stole the acid, bribed Blunt to frighten the girl. When that failed, you aimed at Carol. But Sir Angèle, mercifully, interfered. The nun spoke softly. I substituted water, yes, but I did not alter the veil. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Then who did? From the doorway came the sound of a boat hook scraping stone. Il Corvo stood there, mask in hand, his face revealed. Young, handsome, Flemish. I did, he said, for love of Sir Angèle. She wished the marriage warned, not ended. I wished her free of this house. The room erupted. Karl sprang forward. Blunt swore. Vries reached for his bag. Poirot raised his cane. Enough! The pattern is complete. Madame Clotilde, for the forgery and the poison. Monsieur Blunt, for the usury. Il Corvo, for the threats. Sir Angèle, for the dilution, which saved a life. The police will decide the rest. Sergeant Demotte entered with 2 constables. Clotilde was led away, still protesting. Blunt followed, muttering about embassies. Il Corvo went quietly, his eyes on the nun. Sir Angèle remained, the veil in her lap. And I, monsieur? You will finish the veil properly. Then you will leave the order, I think, and marry your gondolier. God forgives economy of sin. She smiled, the first real smile Poirot had seen. You are wiser than priests, monsieur. 3 days later, the wedding took place. The veil bore 5 swans, all intact. Poirot, in the front pew, noted the absence of gondolas on the canal. As the couple emerged into sunlight, the Belfry Carillon played the wedding march. On time, for once. Poirot raised his hat. In Bruges, even the bells kept their secrets, until the right knot was untied. Chapter 5. The Midnight Gondolier. The house of de Vijf Zwanen settled into an uneasy truce after the revelations in the salon. Clotilde de Jaeger had been removed to the police barracks near the Burg. Her protests, shrill, indignant, laced with genealogical outrage, echoed long after the launch carrying her had vanished round the bend of the Gronerei. Reginald Blunt, sweating and blustering, had been escorted to the same destination, his diamond tie-pin confiscated as evidence of usury. Il Corvo, whose true name proved to be Peter Mays, a lace merchant's son from Ghent, followed in a separate boat, his wrists lightly bound, his dark eyes fixed on Sir Angèle, until the canal swallowed him from sight. Only the nun remained, seated in the lace room with the bridal veil across her knees, her bobbins moving once more with the old precision. The altered swan had been unpicked, the thread ends snipped and buried in a pincushion shaped like a heart. Poirot, however, was not satisfied. The pattern, he told himself, still lacked a final twist. At 11 o'clock that night, he stood at the window of the blue chamber, the curtains drawn back, the canal a ribbon of black satin below. The swans had retired to their island in the Béguinage lake. The city slept beneath a thin mist that rose from the water like the breath of the drowned. He had dismissed Jeff with a murmured instruction. The outer doors were to remain unlocked until dawn. The clock in the hall struck the quarter. A soft scrape of wood against stone drifted upward. Poirot leaned out. The black gondola lay at the landing stage, its prow rocking gently. A figure in a cloak stepped from the shadows of the terrace, tall, stooped, the silhouette unmistakable. Dr. Hans Vries. He carried a small portmanteau, the same Morocco case that had held the antidote. Without a glance upward, he descended the steps to the water. The gondolier, Peter Maes, released on bail that afternoon, extended a hand. Vries boarded with the stiffness of a man unused to boats. The gondola pushed off, the oar dipping soundlessly, and glided beneath the bridge toward the open canal. Poirot donned his overcoat, slipped a small pistol into the pocket, Belgian police issue, a souvenir of 1919, and descended the staircase on silent feet. The hall was dark. Only the red eye of the stove glowed in the kitchen beyond. He let himself out by the garden, door crossed the dew-silvered gravel, and reached the landing stage as the gondola rounded the next bend. A second boat lay moored there, a humble rowing skiff used by the gardener. Poirot cast off, seated himself, and took the oars. His strokes were economical, the result of youthful summers on the Meuse. The skiff moved without splash. The canal narrowed, the houses leaning closer until their gables almost touched overhead. Lanterns on iron brackets threw circles of yellow upon the water. Between them, the mist swallowed everything. Poirot kept the gondola in sight by the faint phosphorescence of its wake. They passed beneath the Pont du Cheval, where the water smelled of weeds and forgotten sins, and emerged into the wider stretch before the Minnewater. Here the mist thinned. The moon, a worn coin, hung above the willows. The gondola veered left into a side canal. Poirot had not noticed before, a narrow cut between high walls, overhung with ivy. He followed, shipping his oars and letting the current carry him. The walls closed in, the air grew cold and damp. Ahead, the gondola bumped against a wooden door set flush with the stone. A flight of steps led upward into darkness. Vries disembarked, the portmanteau in his hand. Peter Maes secured the boat with a painter, then produced a key. The door opened inward on silent hinges. Light spilled out, yellow, steady, the glow of oil lamps. Poirot tied the skiff to a ring, climbed the steps, and peered through the gap. He found himself looking into a cellar vaulted like a crypt. Barrels lined one wall. On the other stood a workbench littered with glassware, retorts, flasks, a Bunsen burner still warm. In the center, upon a deal table, lay the red ledger, open at the page of debts. Beside it, the missing corner of the bridal veil, the snipped fragment Madame Verstraeten had mourned. Vries removed his coat, rolled up his sleeves. From the portmanteau, he took a small bottle labeled acid, hydrocyanic, pure. He measured a quantity into a graduated beaker, then added a powder from a second vial. The mixture turned violet. Peter Maes watched, arms folded. "You are certain, doctor?" "Certain? I am meticulous. The first dose was a failure because the nun interfered. This time there will be no interference." "The wedding is in 3 days." "Precisely. The chocolate will be served at the rehearsal breakfast. Karl will drink. The girl will follow. Grief, they will say. The laceworks revert to Clotilde, who has signed them over to me in return for services." Poirot stepped into the light. "Services, doctor? Or extortion?" Vries spun round, the beaker tilting. A drop of violet liquid fell upon the table. The wood smoked. "Monsieur Poirot." His voice was steady, but the hand that held the beaker trembled. "You are persistent." "One must be when murder is prepared with such chemistry." Peter Mize moved to block the door. Poirot raised the pistol. "Remain still, Mynheer. You have played your part, delivery boy, conspirator, lover, but the game ends here." Vries set the beaker down with care. "You cannot prove." "I can prove everything. The ledger, the veil fragment, the pure acid. Your fingerprints are on the bottle, I observe. The gondola hired with your money. The agreement with Clotilde. Signed in this very room. On the back of a prescription blank. You diagnosed Eleanor's delicacy. To keep her weak, dosed her with harmless tinctures. When the poison failed, you planned a second attempt. But you overlooked the little gray cells. Vries's eyes darted to the beaker. "One step closer and I spill it. The fumes alone would kill us all." Poirot finished. "But you will not. You are a coward, Doctor. Cowards prefer others to die." He advanced. Peter lunged. Poirot sidestepped, brought the cane down sharply on the young man's wrist. The gondolier gasped, cradled his arm. Vries snatched the beaker. Poirot fired once, into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. The doctor froze. "Drop it." The beaker fell, shattered. Violet liquid spread across the floor, eating into the stone. Poirot bound Vries's hands with his own scarf, gagged him with a lace bobbin case. Peter submitted without resistance. At 2 in the morning, the police launch collected them. Sergeant Demotte listened to Poirot's quiet recital, then saluted. "The doctor will hang, monsieur?" "Belgium is civilized. He will be imprisoned, but the laceworks are safe, and the wedding will proceed." Back at De Vijf Zwanen, the house slept. Poirot returned the red ledger to Karel's desk, the veil fragment to Sir Angel's pillow. He left a note for Madame Verstraeten. "The knot is untied. The swans swim free." At dawn he stood on the terrace. The mist had lifted. The canal lay bright as a mirror. 5 swans appeared from beneath the bridge, moving in perfect formation. Poirot raised his hat. "Order is restored," he murmured. "And love, for once, has triumphed over chemistry." 3 days later, the bells of Saint-Sauveur rang out. The bridal veil, flawless now, floated behind Eleanor Gray as she walked the aisle on Karel's arm. Sir Angel, soon to be Madame Mace, stood among the guests, her gray habit replaced by a gown of pale blue silk. Poirot, in the front pew, allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. In Bruges, even midnight gondoliers kept their appointments, until Hercule Poirot altered the tide. Chapter 6. The Substitution. The morning after the cellar arrest dawned pale and windless, the kind of October day that makes Bruges look like a city preserved under glass. Poirot took his coffee in the petit salon, alone with the Gazette van Bruges and a plate of spéculoos. The headline was discreet: "Arrestations dans l'affaire du cygne empoisonné." No names, no sensation. The Verstraetens still commanded respect. At 9 o'clock, Karel knocked and entered, hollow-eyed but composed. He carried a small cedar box. "Monsieur, the family wishes you to have this, for services rendered." Poirot lifted the lid. Inside lay a lace handkerchief, exquisite point de gaze, the 5 swans now entwined in a perfect circle. "Madame Verstraeten's own work," Karel said. "She began it the night you arrived." Poirot inclined his head. "I am honored. But the case is not closed. One thread remains. Karel's brow creased. Dr. Vries confessed everything. Clotilde signed the papers. Pieter Maes admitted the deliveries. What more is there? The substitution, Poirot replied. The poison was diluted. Sir Angel claimed responsibility, yet the phial I found in the garden was empty before the chocolate was poured. Someone else acted first. He rose. Come, we will ask the lady herself. They found Sir Angel, no longer Sir, for the Mother Superior had released her from vows at dawn, in the lace room, packing bobbins into a wicker basket. She wore a simple gray dress. Her hair, released from the coif, was the color of ripe wheat. You leave us? Poirot asked. Pieter waits at the station. We take the noon train to Ghent. A new life, monsieur. Poirot placed the cedar box on the table. Before you go, tell me truly, who diluted the poison? She hesitated, then opened a drawer. From it she drew a second phial, identical to the one in Poirot's pocket, but stoppered and half full. Not I, she said quietly. I intended to, but when I reached the study at 5:30, the cup already stood on the tray, the chocolate cooling. I smelled the almonds, saw the sediment. The dose was already weakened. I added nothing. Karel stared. Then who? Poirot took the phial, held it to the light. Someone who knew chemistry and had access before the cook left the kitchen. Someone who wished Karel alive, but frightened enough to break the engagement. He turned to the window. In the garden below, Jeff, the manservant, was feeding the stray swan with yesterday's brioche. Jeff, Poirot murmured. He has served this house for 40 years. He loved the old mistress, Karel's mother. He saw the debts, the English girl, the ruin of the name. He acted to save what he could. Karel's face hardened. Jeff tried to kill me? No, monsieur. He tried to save you, from yourself. A near-fatal dose would end the marriage, send Eleanor home, preserve the laceworks for a worthier bride. He used the doctor's bag, unlocked during the evening rounds, and measured with the precision of a man who weighs flour and poison alike. Sir Angel crossed herself. He is old. Prison would kill him. Prison is not my intention, Poirot said. Come. They descended to the kitchen. Jeff stood at the sink, sleeves rolled, scrubbing a copper pot as though it were the world's last sin. Poirot laid the phial on the table. You recognize this, Mynheer? Jeff's hands stilled. Water dripped from the pot. I meant no harm, monsieur, only to stop the folly. The English miss. She is kind, but not for us. The laceworks would go to foreigners. I took a little from the doctor's bag, mixed it weak, enough to sicken, not to kill. Then the girl drank. His voice broke. God forgive me. Karel stepped forward, eyes bright with unshed tears. You raised me, Jeff. You taught me to tie my shoes, to row the skiff, and you poisoned me. I poisoned the cup, not you. I thought you would taste, spit, be ill for a day. The marriage would be postponed, the debts renegotiated. I never thought... Poirot raised a hand. Enough. You will leave this house today, Jeff. A pension, generous, will be arranged. You will live with your sister in Knokke. No police, no scandal. But you will never return. Jeff bowed his head. As you say, monsieur. Karel turned away, shoulders shaking. That afternoon the household gathered in the salon for the final time. Madame Verstraeten, erect in black lace, signed the pension papers with a steady hand. Eleanor, fully recovered, pressed a kiss to Jeff's weathered cheek. You meant well, she whispered, in your own foolish way. Jeff left by the garden gate, a small bundle under his arm. The swan followed him to the canal, honking once, then turned back. Poirot watched from the terrace. And so the last thread is cut. The pattern is complete. Madame Verstraeten joined him. You leave us tomorrow? The Brussels train at 10. Duty calls elsewhere. She pressed a second gift into his hand, a tiny enamel swan, no larger than a thumbnail. For your lapel, monsieur, so you will remember that even in Bruges, swans may be tamed. Poirot pinned it to his coat. I shall remember many things, madame. The canals, the lace, the chocolate that did not kill, and the old servant who loved too much. The carillon struck 4. In the lace room the pillows were bare, the bobbins packed away. Somewhere a train whistle sounded, faint across the water. Poirot raised his hat to the 5 swans gliding beneath the bridge. Adieu, mes amis. Swim straight. The next morning he boarded the train with his green valise and the cedar box. As Bruges receded, the belfry's bells played a fragment of the wedding march, off-key but cheerful. Poirot smiled, closed his eyes, and allowed the rhythm of the wheels to lull him. Order had been restored. The lace was intact. The swans were safe. Chapter 7. The Lace-Maker's Knot. The wedding eve arrived with a sky the color of fresh cream and a wind that carried the scent of roasting chestnuts from the markt. De Vijf Zwanen had shed its mourning. Garlands of white roses twined the balustrades, and the swans, real and heraldic, gleamed against the dark water. Poirot, retained for the occasion as family friend, stood in the lace room at dusk. The bridal veil lay finished upon its frame, a miracle of frost and moonlight. Sir Angèle. No, Madame Mays now, for the civil ceremony had taken place that morning in Ghent, adjusted a final pearl with fingers that no longer trembled. You are certain, madame? Poirot asked. The pattern is exact? She smiled, the serene smile of a woman who has chosen love over habit. 5 swans, monsieur, all intact. No noose, no broken neck. Jeff's medallion was the last false note. Pieter Maes entered, hat in hand. He wore the sober black of a respectable merchant, but his eyes still held the canal's darkness. The gondola is ready. We sail at moonrise. Honeymoon on the Lies. Poirot bowed. Bon voyage, and remember, lace is patient, but husbands must learn haste. They laughed, the sound light as seed pearls. Downstairs the rehearsal dinner awaited. The long table was set with the Verstraeten silver, candelabra shaped like swans, salt cellars of rock crystal, a centerpiece of forced lilies whose perfume filled the room. Madame Verstraeten presided in sapphire velvet. Karl, at her right, wore the dazed happiness of a man who has survived shipwreck. Eleanor, opposite, glowed in palest pink. The violet shadows beneath her eyes had vanished. Dr. Vries's absence was the only void. His confession, signed in the cellar, witnessed by Sergeant Demotte, lay sealed in Poirot's valise. Clotilde de Jaeger had refused counsel. Her trial would begin after the New Year. Reginald Blunt had fled to Ostend with what remained of his dignity and none of his tie-pin. The meal proceeded with Flemish abundance, waterzooey of sole, pheasant with endive, a charlotte russe that trembled like the veil itself. Wines flowed, Sancerre, then a Corton Charlemagne of noble vintage. At the dessert course, Poirot rose. The room stilled, even the candles seemed to listen. Mesdames et messieurs, a toast to the bride and groom. May their union be as enduring as Bruges lace, as serene as the canals at dawn. Glasses lifted. Carl's hand found Eleanor's across the cloth. Poirot continued, voice soft. "And a small demonstration, with your permission." He produced from his pocket the empty phial found in the garden, the half-full one from the lace room, and a third, stoppered, labeled in Vries's spidery hand. Pure HCN. 3 phials, he said. One used by Jeff, diluted, merciful. One prepared by Sir Angel, never poured. One intended by Dr. Vries for tomorrow's chocolate, all now harmless. He placed them in a row. But observe. From beneath the table, he drew a lace pillow, small, portable, the kind used by traveling lace makers. Upon it lay a single motif, a swan whose neck formed a perfect knot, the Gordian knot of legend. "This," Poirot said, "was found this morning in the doctor's cell. He worked it in secret, using threads smuggled by a guard. A confession in lace. He unpicked the knot with a silver bodkin. The swan dissolved into loose threads. Thus murder unravels. The doctor wished the laceworks for himself. Clotilde was his dupe, Blunt his tool, Peter his courier. Jeff acted alone, from love. Sir Angel, from mercy. Each thread crossed, but none held the pattern together. Only truth does that." He raised his glass again. "To truth and to love, which unties every knot." They drank. Outside, the carillon began the evening hymn. The notes floated through the open windows like white birds. Later, on the terrace, Poirot spoke alone with Madame Verstraeten. The canal lay black and silver. The swans had returned, 5 pale shapes against the darkness. "You leave tomorrow?" she asked. "The Orient Express connects at Brussels, a small matter in Istanbul." She pressed a final gift into his hand, a bobbin of gold thread, wound tight. "For your next case, monsieur, may it bind only happiness." Poirot tucked it into his waistcoat. "Happiness, madame, is the finest lace of all." At moonrise, the gondola glided from the landing stage. Peter poled with steady strokes. His bride sat in the stern, veil discarded, hair loose to the wind. They passed beneath the bridge, waved once, and vanished toward the open water. Poirot watched until the ripple of their wake smoothed into stillness. Then he turned indoors. The house was quiet. The candles burned low. In the blue chamber he packed with his usual precision. The lace handkerchief went into the valise beside the enamel swan and the gold bobbin. On the dressing table he left a note for Jeff, now in Canoca. The swans swim straight because old friends watch from the shore. At dawn, the fiacre waited. Poirot descended, cane tapping, mustaches magnificent. The 5 swans escorted him to the canal's edge, honking softly as if in farewell. He raised his hat. "Adieu, mes cygnes, guard the lace and the love." The horse trotted toward the station. Behind him, Bruges woke to its wedding day. Bells, roses, the scent of waffles and eternity. Poirot leaned back against the cushions, another knot untied, another pattern complete. The train whistle sounded across the polders. Hercule Poirot closed his eyes and smiled. Order, as always, had prevailed. Chapter 8. The Swans at Dawn. The wedding morning broke with a clarity rare in Bruges, a sky of polished steel, the canals reflecting every gable and gargoyle with the fidelity of a mirror. At 6:30, Poirot stood on the terrace of De Vijf Zwanen, coat collar turned up against the nip in the air, watching the 5 swans perform their daily ritual. They moved in formation from the shadow of the bridge to the landing stage, paused, and regarded him with identical black eyes. He addressed them softly in French. "You are punctual, mes amis, a virtue I admire." One swan, larger with a scar across its beak, honked once, as though in agreement. Poirot smiled, produced a crust saved from breakfast, and tossed it onto the water. The birds converged with aristocratic disdain, necks arching like question marks. Behind him the house stirred. Jeff's successor, a taciturn youth from Dam, clattered buckets in the scullery. Madame Verstraeten's voice floated down the stairwell, giving final orders about the placement of lilies in the hall. Karl's laugh, lighter than it had been in weeks, answered her. Poirot turned indoors. The salon had been transformed into a bower. White roses banked the mantel. The chandelier sparkled as though newly born, and the Turkey rug bore fresh marks from the florist's boots. Upon the marquetry cabinet stood the bridal bouquet, orange blossom, stephanotis, and a single white swan feather tied with silver ribbon. At 8 o'clock, the household assembled for a light collation, coffee, brioche, tiny glasses of advocat. Eleanor entered on Carol's arm, radiant in a traveling dress of dove-gray silk, the famous veil folded carefully in tissue. Her eyes sought Poirot. "Monsieur, you will stay for the ceremony?" "Alas, mademoiselle, the Orient Express waits for no man, not even Hercule Poirot, but I have arranged a small surprise." He clapped his hands. Jeff appeared in the doorway, cap in hand, eyes lowered. The old servant had been summoned from Knokke at dawn. Madame Verstraeten, after a night of prayer, had forgiven. "I wish to see the knot tied properly," Jeff murmured. "With your permission, madame." Madame Verstraeten inclined her head. "You will stand at the back, Jeff, and no tears on the lace." The fiacre arrived at 9. Poirot's valise was already aboard. The cedar box containing the handkerchief rested upon it like a talisman. He took leave with punctilious courtesy. A bow to Madame Verstraeten, a handshake for Carol, a kiss on both cheeks for Eleanor. Sir Angèle, no, Madame Mace, arrived in a motor car lent by Peter's cousin. She wore the pale blue silk again, a spray of orange blossom at her throat. "We delayed our sailing one day," she said. "Peter insisted. He rose the bridal couple to the church. Tradition, he claims." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Tradition is the lace that binds the past to the future. I approve." The procession formed. The motor car for the family, the gondola for the bride and groom, a second boat for the veil and the bouquet. Poirot walked to the station, refusing escort. The streets were already filling. Children in starched collars, women with prayer books, the scent of incense drifting from open church doors. At the corner of the Volestraat, he paused. The black gondola, repainted white for the occasion, glided past, Peter at the oar, Carol and Eleanor in the stern. The veil, released from its tissue, floated behind them like a cloud. Passers-by cheered. A small boy threw rice that pattered onto the water like hail. Poirot raised his cane in salute. The swans followed the gondola to the church steps, then turned back, as though satisfied. The train departed at 10:05. Poirot occupied his usual corner seat, the green valise on the rack, the enamel swan gleaming on his lapel. As Bruges receded, the belfry's bells began the wedding peal, clear, joyous, slightly off-key. He opened the cedar box, drew out the lace handkerchief, and spread it upon his knee. The 5 swans were perfect, each feather stitched with microscopic care. In the corner, almost invisible, Madame Verstraeten had worked a tiny monogram. H.P. Poirot folded the lace with reverence and returned it to the box. Outside, the polders unrolled in squares of brown and gold. A heron rose from a dike, wings beating slow as a pulse. The conductor passed. "Istanbul, monsieur?" "Eventually, but first, a small detour to Brussels. One must collect one's mail." The man touched his cap and moved on. Poirot leaned back, closed his eyes, and allowed the rhythm of the wheels to compose a private carillon. In the distance, the bells of Bruges faded. Another case concluded, another pattern complete. Yet in the quiet of the compartment he heard, faint but persistent, the lap of canal water against stone, the soft creak of a gondola, the honk of 5 swans keeping perfect time.